there guys, and welcome back. On this week's show, part 11 of our ukulele build. Well, here we are today, part 11. Hard to believe that it's been going on this long, but this isn't a one-day project. So we'll carry on with it, part 11. And this is where we're at this point in time. We've got the body done, all the binding, everything looks great. The instrument has a good solid feel, and that's what we're looking for. We got a nice flat surface between the neck and the body, and we're going to put this aside for the moment and turn our attention to the fretboard. Now last week we cut all of the kerfs for the fret wires. As well, we put in some epoxy into the marker dots, and that's where we're going to start today, with getting those marker dots trimmed flush and sanded. Well, I'll just show you what we're looking at now, and here are our 3 dots, and the epoxy is nice and dry, but it is raised, it is pronounced, and we'd rather have these flush. And that's no big deal. And I think the method I'm going to try here is I'm going to get a nice sharp chisel and try to trim these flush and just see how that works for me. You just want to be careful that you don't gouge the wood or change the shape of it. You want to try to leave it as flat as possible. And that trimmed up nicely. So at this point in time now, we can get a very fine micro abrasive sandpaper. I'm going to check and see what I've got. Probably something in the neighborhood of 1500. I'm going to give this a little bit of a sanding just to polish it up just a little bit. Well, what we ended up doing was using a 1500 grit to just take the scratches out from the chisel, and then I used a 12,000 grit micro abrasive that I used for polishing when I'm turning, and I wet sanded the marker dots not to a high sheen, but just so that they're, you know, not so rough looking. So we're happy with that. And now the next thing we need to do is set our fret wires into place into the kerfs that we placed there in last week's show. Well, there are several methods that you can use to install these fret wires, and I'm going to show you 3 of them. And the first one is a little on the scary side, but it works. I don't know what else to say. You line up your fret wire, and you can see it's oversized. We're going to trim that after. But you line up your fret wire, and with a rubber mallet, you don't want a huge one here, just tap it ever so gently into the fret. Now you don't want to tap it too much because you'll end up overseating it, but you don't want to tap it too little to make it so that it's underseated. And this right now, I'll show you. This is underseated. So we're going to tap this into place, and then I'll show you another method that you can use. The next method that you can use would be the same mallet, except instead of hammering directly onto the fret wire, place the fret wire in its place there in the slot. Just give it a little wrap to get it started. And yes, this is finicky. This one doesn't like me. And once you get it started, lay a block of wood over top and give it a few wraps on top of the wooden block. And then you want to check to see where it's seated and where it's not. Just like that. So that would be the second method, would be using a wooden block. If you didn't feel comfortable hitting right on the fret wire. You could, of course, use a block and put it in. Now we'll show you a third method that you could use. The third method is the least aggressive of the three, and it utilizes the drill press, that same block of wood, and all you need to do is just tap your fret wire to get it started, and then bring it over to the drill press, put your block just over the fret wire, and use the chuck of your drill press to finish seating that fret wire. And it just gives nice even pressure to place it down into your fretboard, and truth be told, it does a really nice job. So I think that will be my preferred method here, and then I can go along with the little mallet and tap them into place just to finish them off. And if you were careful and successful, you should have something that looks like this. And don't worry about the overhang, we're going to deal with that next. But just to let you know, see the spring in this? As the fret wires went in, the fretboard likes to bow. So depending on what method you're using, you may want to clamp this to the bench to avoid the springy nature of the board, which is going to cause you problems. Because even if you use the drill press method, it doesn't hurt to go along with the mallet and just make sure that everything is nicely seated, and you don't need this thing bouncing around because of that springing. So clamp it to the bench, guys. At this point in time, we're going to trim off all of the excess on the sides. I'm going to be using some wire cutters for this, and what you may want to do also is get a pair of safety glasses, because this stuff is going to fly, just in case you don't want to get a piece in the eye. So basically you want to hold it, get in there as tight as you can, and just give it a little snip. So go along the whole fretboard, giving each one of these a trim, and once we get them all trimmed down, you don't need to get it perfectly flush because we're going to be sanding this afterwards anyway. But once you get them pretty much trimmed down, then we're going to move on to the next step. Well, I get the feeling I'll be finding pieces of fret wire around my shop for the next 25 years, according to how those offcuts were flying around the room. But now that we've got them trimmed, we're going to go over to the disc sander. And what we're going to do is, ever so gently and ever so easily, we're just going to use that disc sander to bring those fret wires flush to the edge of the fretboard. But you want to be very careful here. Do not change the side profile of your fretboard. So make sure that you're only sanding the fret wires. As well, before you hit the disc sander, check each one of the fret wires to make sure that by cutting them with the wire cutters, you didn't make one of them accidentally pop up or loosen, or somehow not get seated. So make sure they're all perfectly seated, and then we'll head over to the disc sander. Well, we're over here at the disc sander, and I just want to say that safety gear is a priority here, guys, especially when you're sanding steel pieces like these fret wires. I'm going to need my glasses to see, so I'll be using my face shield over top of my glasses. But you just want to go easy. Don't go crazy, because these are sharp edges against the sandpaper. It can tear the paper. It can cause you problems. So just go real slow, real easy, and real gentle. Well, we have them all sanded flush to our fretboard, and now what we need to do is to sand each one of these frets off at a 45-degree angle, kind of taking that sharp edge off there, because you don't want to be playing around with that sharp edge while you're trying to play the instrument. This should be nice and soft to the edge of the fingers as you're playing. So we're going to go ahead and just ever so gently on the disc sander take them down to sort of a 45. Well, I've zoomed in here just to show you the 45s on the fret wire, and the thing is now is that on each one of these corners we now have a bit of a sharp edge. So what you need to do is the entire fretboard now, we need to cover it in masking tape just to protect it, and ever so gently we're going to use a small file just to knock off those corners on the edges here. So I don't know if you can see it very well, but it's this corner right here and the same on the other side of the fret wire on both sides. And once we get that done, then we'll carry on with the next step. But it's going to take me a while to mask this out, so I'll see you once I get it masked. Well, the fretboard is completely masked off, and as I said now, you want to get in here and file these little corners. So just get in there and gently round them off. This is a time-consuming process, so don't think you're going to get it done in 5 minutes, because that's not happening. But round off each one of these 4 corners on every fret. And keep an eye on your masking tape. If your masking tape starts to wear through, put another piece on it, because the masking tape is there to protect the wood of your fretboard. So go ahead and file all the sharp corners on every one of your fret wires. Well, all of those fret wires are sanded, or filed rather, so there's no sharp edges. And now it's time to mount our fretboard to our instrument. And you can see there already, just sitting there, just how professional this really looks. And when you take your time like this, the results you get are just unbelievable. So this here is going to be mounted and clamped on here. Simple wood glue will be just fine for this. So we're going to spread a nice coating of glue on the back of our fretboard and lay it in place, and just double check for measurements and make sure that everything lines up. And we're going to press it down just gently at first and let the glue set up so that it won't slide. And once it's in place, we're really going to clamp it down and wipe out any squeeze out and get that firmly seated on there. And we're just going to let that set up for a little bit before we can clamp it, just to make sure that it doesn't shift. So make sure that all your alignment is right, that it's center, that it's nice and square to your lines up at the top, and that your 12th fret, or whichever fret you're using for alignment, is nice and square across your ukulele. And let this set now. And then we're going to clamp it all up, as I said, and then we can move on. But make sure you clean up the squeeze out really well, guys. And once again, surgical tubing has come to the rescue to what was initially an extremely awkward and difficult clamping job. Pretty? No. Does the job? Heck yeah. So we're going to let this set up, let her dry out, and when we come back, we're going to carry on with our ukulele build. Well, the ukulele's been clamped up in here for a while, and we're going to unclamp this at this point in time and clean up any squeeze out. Obviously, with it being so wrapped up in the surgical tubing, we can't see any of the squeeze out. So what I'm going to do is unclamp all of this, clean up the squeeze out along the edge of the fretboard, and then clamp it back up again. Sometimes what can happen when you're gluing your fretboard is because the fretboard is soaking up the moisture from the glue, it can have a tendency to curve like this. It's probably a little less likely with the surgical tubing holding it down like this, but if yours should start cupping like that, you can combat that and help fight against it by spraying a little bit of water on the front end of your fretboard before applying the glue and placing it down. And there is quite a bit of squeeze out here, and that's okay. We're just going to take a scraper. It hasn't had the chance to fully set yet, so a scraper with some light scraping will just remove all of this squeeze out off of our neck and off of the side of our fretboard without any problems. Don't scrape too hard, guys. You don't want to damage your neck or gouge it at this point in time. But just a little light scraping will take all of that squeeze out away. Once your glue is set and your fretboard is securely on here, you can go ahead and sand these edges again just to fine-tune them to make sure that you have a perfect mate here between your fretboard and your neck. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and I'll see you guys after that when I'm done. Well, now that we've got the fretboard and all the fret wires sanded and you know, shaped so that there's no sharp edges, what we need to do now is we need to drill the holes in the headstock for our tuning pegs. Now, there's several different styles that you can use, and whatever style you use is up to you. I've chosen this style because I want the tuning knobs to be out the side of the instrument. So for now, what we're going to need to do is I'm going to have to take a measurement of the diameter of this shaft. And if you remember earlier in the build, when we made the template for the headstock, we also center punched marks for 4 holes, and those will be the location for us to drill whatever diameter hole this shaft will need. Well, I've checked the diameter of the tuning peg shaft, and what we're going to require in my particular build is a 1/4 inch diameter through hole. And for that, we're going to use a brad point bit. Make sure you use a backer board so that you can avoid any tear out, and drill from front to back. That way, if you do get any tear out, it will be hidden by this mounting plate that's here. So go ahead and let's drill the 4 holes that we require in the headstock for our tuning pegs. Well, we're over here at the drill press, and what we have is our 2 old forms that were 6% too small, if you remember correctly. And the reason for that is that the neck is sloped, so we need to be able to sit this up on a raised platform in order to get this to sit flat for drilling. So we're just going to line it up with our pre-marked holes that we did in an earlier part of the build, and just ever so carefully and slowly drill down through the headstock with the hole to accept our tuning pegs. We're going to use the old forms as a backer board to try to minimize any tear out, and we'll just see how we did there with that. There is a little bit of tear out there, I'm not too concerned. As I said, the mounting plate will cover that. And before I drill the other 3, I just want to test to make sure that everything looks okay. And then I'm going to go ahead and drill the other 3 holes for our tuning pegs. All 4 holes are drilled in the headstock, and at this point in time now, go ahead and give that headstock a really good sanding and get rid of all of those layout marks that you put on there, as well as the any rough edges on the back where you may have had a little bit of tear out during that drilling process. And now we've got the neck sanded, the headstock sanded, and I did leave the little bit of marks down here, the center marks and the 1 layout line just above the fretboard, and that's where we will be installing the nut when it comes time for that. So I thought I'll leave those in there to help me align the nut properly once it goes on. The next thing we really want to look at now is making the bridge. So I think we're going to start with that, and I'd like to have the bridge match the fretboard. So we're going to go through and find ourselves a nice piece of walnut. Well, I've chosen a piece of walnut, and what you're going to need is a piece that's 1/4 inch thick. Now, there are other dimensions that you're going to need, and we'll get to those. But for now, what we're going to have to do is we want to rip a couple strips of this 1/4 inch walnut, and we need it to be 5/8 of an inch wide. So go ahead over to the table saw and rip a couple pieces of that. The next thing you want to do is you want to square off the ends of both pieces of your stock and cut them to a length of 2 1/4 inches long. Well, here we have it, our little bridge, and this bridge here, like I said, is 2 1/4 inches long. It's 5/8 of an inch wide, and it will be 1/4 of an inch thick. Now, the bridge will also have a bone saddle that will be installed in this, but at the moment I have ordered some bone to cut the saddle from, but it hasn't come in as of yet. So we'll carry on with the wooden portions of this project. Either way, we have our bridge now, and what we need to do is put some marks on the 1/4 inch side of our board. And they will be a mark at 3/8 of an inch in, and then a 1/2 inch in from that at 7/8 of an inch, and then a 1/2 inch in from that at 1 3/8 of an inch, and then another 1/2 inch in from that at 1 7/8. So we can go ahead and put those 4 marks here on our wood for our bridge. Well, we have those 4 marks on there, and it's imperative that they be right on the money with the dimensions that I gave you. So now let's go ahead and transfer those marks around to the 5/8 side of our bridge. Well, we now have those marks on both our 5/8 side and our 1/4 inch side. So now this is only one of them, and we only really need one for the instrument. But what we're going to do now is we're going to take our second piece and we're going to clamp it together just like this, and then we're going to head over to the drill press. Well, this is going to be a little difficult to show on camera, but what I've done is I've center punched each one of these marks on the 1/4 inch side, and I've clamped using this hand screw clamp the 2 boards together, and I'm going to be drilling right in the center of the two boards. So essentially, half of the hole will be drilled on either side of the board. So I'm just going to line up my brad point here. This is a 1/8 inch drill bit. And we're just going to go ahead and slowly drill down through. I want to be careful that we don't get any wandering of the bit. So just go slow. There's no rush. Clean out the bit once in a while by raising it up out of the wood. And continue all the way through until you have the hole completed. And once you have the hole finished, you can go ahead and drill the other 3 holes so that you have all 4 drilled through. And now that we've got all 4 of those holes drilled, we can release this hand screw clamp and take these pieces of wood out of this particular clamp. And the piece that you marked your original holes on and transferred those lines to the 5/8 side, this piece you want to keep. This piece that you used for support of the drill bit, get rid of it. We don't want to confuse the two at this point, because this is your bridge, and those half holes which you've just drilled, those will allow your ukulele strings to travel under the bridge once you go to string it. And this actually here will be mounted flat on the ukulele just like this. And don't worry about the little bit of tear out there. We're going to sand all that up and fix it all up. There's no trouble there. But now, at this point in time, what we need to do is cut a few slots where we've placed these marks here on our 5/8 inch side. The next step that you want to do is you want to cut some saw kerfs straight down through the 1/4 inch side, but you only want to go down 1/8 of an inch. For that, we're going to use our little miter box here, and we're just going to line everything up to make sure that we know that it's going to fit right, and just take your time to make sure that you don't go too deep. We're using the miter box so that we get some nice square cuts on our bridge, because it is going to be fully visible when the instrument is done. Well, we've placed a kerf cut line down here, just like we did on the other side when we were working with our fretboard, and we're just going to line up that line. I've also, I don't know if you noticed, placed a little bit of blue painter's tape on there. Pencil is a little difficult to see on walnut, so the edge of that blue tape there represents my 1/8 of an inch deep. So I'll just line up this line here with our kerf line, line up our saw, and just gently, don't go crazy here, it's only 1/8 of an inch. Check it frequently. Remembering, of course, to use the edges of this miter box to guide your saw squarely down into the cut. And there we go. There is our one cut in there. Let me just do this. There we go. So we're going to go ahead and cut all 4 slots, and then I'll come back and see you. Well, we've got all 4 kerfs cut, and now you just want to go ahead and sand it. Don't go too crazy on the sanding. Let me just show you. I've sanded mine. Let me just show you here what it looks like. And don't go too crazy because we still have one more kerf to cut in this for our bone saddle that will go into this, and that is the part, of course, that hasn't come yet. So let me just show you here where that's going to be. Hey, show them where the kerf's going to be, will you? Thank you. So polite. Anyway, because we don't have that bone, we can't carry on with the bridge. The bone will also be up at the nut. So, sad to say, that's it for this week's show, and our build is on hold for a little while until those parts come in. But they're supposed to be in fairly soon. So we're looking forward to moving on with this build probably in the next couple weeks. You, however, will see it next week. There is a delay with my show as most of them are pre-recorded. So guys, I want to thank you again for tuning in. This thing is looking awesome. So I hope yours is going to look as great as mine. In fact, I know it will. So thanks for tuning in, and I'm going to see you again next week with yet another woodworking video. Right?